Good morning, afternoon, and evening, whenever you're watching this, Rabuni family in the U.S. and different parts of the world. Thank you for joining us today as we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Trinity. Now, I will say that this feast is one that priests don't like to preach on, because what can you say about the Holy Trinity? Three persons, one God, whatever. And maybe that's why I'm preaching today, that Father Lawman didn't want to preach. No, I actually offered to preach this Sunday as he is out of town. But I want to start with a story that I think says a little bit about what the Trinity is. And you probably heard this story, the story of the guy who was stuck in a flood and who was a man of faith and really relied on God to save him. And in the midst of that flood, as the waters are rising, he says, "I know that God will save me." And the water started engulfing his first floor. And a boat comes along, and this guy says, "Hop in, I'll save you." And the guy looks at him and says, "No, God will save me. I have faith." Later, the water was up to his second floor. Another boat comes along. The guy says, "Hop in, I will save you." And the guy in the house says, "No, God will save me. I have faith." And the water then rose up to the roof, and a helicopter flew over the house and said, "Grab on, we'll save you." And the guy said, "No, God will save me." Well, long story short, the guy ends up drowning, and in heaven, he's very disappointed in God and says to God, "You said that you would save me. I had faith and you didn't. And I'm so disappointed, God." And God responds, "Well, I sent two boats and a helicopter. What did you expect?" I'm sure you've heard that story before. But what does this have to do with the Feast of the Holy Trinity that we celebrate today? The Feast of the Holy Trinity is actually very powerful because it says something very fundamental and important about who God is and our relationship with God and one another and what that is all about. Essentially, the fact that we believe God is three persons in one isn't some theological mystery to figure out. But what it says, and this is very important, what it says is that from all time, God is essentially relational, a community of love, a communion of three persons who poured themselves out, literally poured themselves out in the creation of the universe and all of creation, including us. None of us, what does this say to us? None of us go it alone in our lives. No matter how introverted we are, like me, we all need people in our lives. And that's why we naturally gravitate toward finding a partner and or friends to share our lives with. We're hardwired for relationship if we are made in the image and likeness of God. It's no wonder that we're hardwired for relationships, because what the Trinity essentially says is that God is a relationship of love. This dynamic dance between God, Son, and Spirit. And we, then made in the image and likeness of God, are also hardwired for that dance of relationship in our lives. When an infant is born, interesting point. When an infant is born, if it receives food and shelter, but does not receive human touch and affection, it will fail to develop normally. Isn't that fascinating? If it receives food and shelter, but does not receive human touch, that baby will fail to develop normally. This is how incredibly hardwired we are for relationship. It also says something about our relationship with God, that it's not just private, a one-on-one, me and God type of thing, but that we're called to share this relationship in community. That's why we gather Sunday after Sunday, because whether we know it or not, we are strengthened when we gather with others who share our faith and our beliefs. I am so fed by you. I've said this before and I will say it again. I am so fed by you and our prayer together, by your presence and by the relationships and faith that we share. We are meant to be in relationship and rely on one another and give ourselves for the building up of one another. If we don't have good relationships in our lives, we literally begin to shrivel. The life force is drained for us. I remember when I lived in the country, sometimes I would go 5 days without seeing another human being. And as introverted as I am, as comfortable as I am with my own company, I literally felt the life force draining from me, and I would have to reach out and have contact with people. Certainly, many of us felt this during the pandemic. Did you feel that sense of isolation during the pandemic? Did you feel some of the life force draining out of you and perhaps getting depressed or reaching to this or that to fill the void? God is essentially a relationship, a community of love, and that's what the Trinity means. And we are hardwired for a relationship. That's why the family unit is so important to the fabric of who we are as human beings. No matter what shape that family takes, whether it be two-parent family or single-parent family, gay family, straight family, whatever, family is essential to our well-being as humans. You know, I think of all the dads and moms that we have celebrated. We celebrated Mother's Day in May. Father's Day is coming up next Sunday. I think of all the dads and moms that we celebrate these days, and your all-important ministry of providing for your family the guidance you give your children and the self-giving that you give your children. I never understood this until my sister and brother started having children. And when I saw what it took for them to raise their children, the time and the effort, the energy, the self-giving, when they'd rather not, then I began to understand how important this is, how important this ministry is, and what energy it takes. I recently began fostering a dog who was a stray and who was up to be euthanized. And he has kept me up at night. If I'm looking a little tired, that's why. He's a great Pyrenees, and apparently they stay up at night. They're nocturnal because they watch the house. This is nothing compared to parents raising children, but I'm getting just a little glimpse fostering this huge dog. And hopefully he will find a good family one day. Again, next Sunday is Father's Day, and to the fathers and father figures in our lives, thank you for your all-important ministry. Thank you for reflecting the love and self-giving of the Trinity. You are the ultimate teachers of your children because faith is not taught, faith is caught. Listen to that again. Faith is not taught. Faith is caught. As your children see the reality of your faith lived out in love and compassion and justice, they catch on to that. And they begin to model their lives after your compassion and love and justice. For those of us who have not had the grace of a good family upbringing, there is still hope in the father and motherly figures in our lives. I've told the story many times before about a mentor in my life, Father Jerry Austin. I did my graduate work at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and he was my academic advisor. And I've told the story of how Jerry really stretched me into being the best person that I could be academically and individually as a person. My father, some of you know this, was an alcoholic. He was abusive and didn't really believe in me. At least the messages that I would get is that you're stupid and you'll never amount to anything and stuff like that. But Jerry became this father figure to me at Catholic University when I was there. And he did it in a difficult way. You know, he stretched me, he pushed me. He pushed me academically. He pushed me in a way, you know, in saying, Kevin, this theology that you're studying has to get inside of you and has to become a part of your spirit. And before I graduated with my master's degree, Jerry told me, he said, Kevin, your father may not have believed in you, but I want you to know that I believe in you. And that meant everything to me. Jerry was a huge father figure to me, a huge influence. Because of his love, I was changed, and through the trajectory of my life was changed. I began to believe in myself. I began to believe that I did have gifts and talents to share with the people of God and people in general. So fathers and father figures out there, never ever discount the incredible influence that you have in our world. Incidentally, and I've said this before, after reading a book by Wayne Dyer, I began to think of my father in a different way. Wayne tells this story of this imaginary conversation that he has with God before coming into this world. And God looks at him and says, Wayne, what do you want to do with this life that you'll have? And Wayne says, I want to teach people spiritual reliance and compassion. And so God says, are you sure that this is what you want to do? And Wayne says, yes. And so God says, Wayne, you're going to be born into a family where your father will be a horrible alcoholic who will abuse you and who will abandon you and your mom. And this will teach you compassion and spiritual self-giving. Wayne responded to God, that may be good for me, but what a waste of life for my father. And God says, Wayne, not really. Your father will give his entire life just so you can learn compassion and spiritual reliance. I wouldn't say that's a waste, would you? So again, sisters and brothers, God is essentially a community of love, and we are meant to be in relationship, be it family, friends, church, partner, whatever. This week, maybe we can reflect a little bit on the relationships that we do have and give thanks for them and how they have and do make a difference in our lives, and give thanks. And maybe pick up the phone or write a note to one of those friends or our partners, our husbands, our wives, you know, to let them know how much we appreciate them. And certainly as Father's Day comes up next Sunday, you know, do that for our fathers. Maybe it's time to reach out and to say thank you. Brothers and sisters, I pray that God won't have to read that people won't have to read what God is about or what love is about, but that people will simply look at us and our lives and see what God is like and what love is like. May we be a reflection of the Trinity. May people see that we are indeed a community of love that makes such a concrete difference in the world in which we live. Amen.